In the last episode we saw, Mabel thought about ways to keep Lisandro out of her room, but she realized that she couldn't physically prevent him from entering. As a baby, she was limited in what she could do to control her environment. However, she decided to use her actions and reactions to make it clear that she didn't like him and didn't want him around. Whenever Lisandro entered the room, Mabel would start crying loudly and flailing her arms. She wanted to express her discomfort and make it evident that she didn't want him near her. Mabel hoped that her strong negative reaction would discourage him from staying or coming back in the future. Additionally, Mabel tried to create a sense of distance between Lisandro and her nanny, Ruft. She knew that Lisandro flirted with Ruft and wanted to keep him away from her. Whenever Lisandro approached Ruft or engaged in playful banter with her, Mabel would babble angrily and make annoyed grunts. She wanted to show her disapproval and possessiveness towards her nanny. Although Mabel's attempts may not have had an immediate effect, she hoped that over time, Lisandro would understand her dislike for him and choose to stay away from her. She wanted to protect her personal space and maintain a positive environment with her beloved nanny and brother, Oscar. Now it was morning, and sunlight entered the house through the nearest door. Mabel woke up. At first, she was a little surprised to see a wet cloth on her forehead, but then she remembered that she had been sick last night and had felt dizzy too. But now she felt a little better. At first, she thought she might have been dreaming, and that's why she couldn't remember anything that had happened last night. Then her father entered her room, and upon realizing that Mabel was pretending to be asleep again, he sighed. Mabel thought to herself that it was good that she didn't remember anything, because it was better to forget the memories involving this man. Mabel turned to the side with a yawning gesture, but kept her eyes on her father. She wondered why her father had come there. At first, upon seeing Mabel sleeping with her face turned, Estevan's face darkened, but then he approached her with a smile and noticed that her fever had subsided. Seeing this, Mabel was a little surprised and annoyed, and she began to wonder why her father was taking care of her. She started looking for her nanny. Her father took her in his arms and said that although the medicine had been very bitter, his daughter had been very strong and could bear it. He started checking the medicine. Observing the state of his eyes, Mabel thought that her father might not have slept last night. And then it occurred to her that maybe it hadn't been a dream, but her father had really been watching over her last night. Mabel couldn't hold back her tears after realizing that. Her father picked her up and hugged her to his chest, asking Mabel if she still hurt. Mabel felt her father's soft hand on her back and wondered if he really loved her. But why? Did she deserve to be loved like this? And above all, a man's feelings change. She had understood that in her previous life. Seeing this love from her father, she felt a little insecure, as she couldn't really believe it. The scene changed. A gust of wind opened the door. Mabel closed her eyes and enjoyed the smell of summer. Her nanny told a maid that one door was enough to let air into the room, so the rest of the windows should be closed. Mabel began to think that she was not feeling well because she was sick, but the wind was no big deal. What was worse was that she was so small that she couldn't even walk, but she didn't like lying like this anymore. She turned around and looked at the nanny in annoyance, acting restlessly as if she wanted to go out. Oscar entered the room, wiping his sweat and saying that it had been very hot outside that day. The nanny went to make some iced tea for him. Oscar thanked her and sat on the bed with his sister in his arms. Mabel knew that if Oscar came, then Lisandro would also come. Looking back, Mabel saw Lisandro peeking out from behind the door. Mabel screamed at the sight of him, and Lisandro stood there like a fool when he realized it. He couldn't come, as it would have made her angrier. Oscar asked Mabel if she really disliked Lisandro that much, and then he convinced Mabel not to hate Lisandro so much. He also said that Lisandro had stopped playing with him and had been a little hard on him to help him improve his swordsmanship, but he actually wanted the best for him. And actually, Lisandro was not a bad person at all, but a very good one. Hearing this, Mabel thought to herself that she had kicked Lisandro out for Oscar's sake, but there he was, supporting Lisandro instead. He should have supported his sister, even though Lisandro treated him well. Oscar then asked Xavier to bring him some books. Xavier brought many books at once. Mabel was surprised to see so many books together. She couldn't understand how her brother could read so many books at once. Seeing Mabel's scared face, Oscar said that they were all his homework. Mabel picked up a book and wondered if this one was as difficult as the previous one. Then she looked at the book her brother was reading. But she couldn't read a single line of the book because she was a child, and for that, she started blaming God for not giving her the ability to hear, because if she could hear, then she could read. Later, she became curious to see the maps in the book Oscar was reading. Seeing that, Oscar asked his sister if she was enjoying the book this time, because last time she hadn't shown any sign of interest in it. Mabel said to herself that obviously she hadn't been interested in reading about Alger Chekhov's policies, but she was interested in the pictures and the maps in the book. That's all she cares about now. Mabel enthusiastically began to explore everything. At first, she spotted the Irma Kingdom, her home, as the largest on the map. Her brother told her that the kingdom had ruled for 500 years and had expanded its lands through years of warfare. As she witnessed history unfold before her, she was awed by the facts. One by one, he started showing her other kingdoms on the map. Mabel thought to herself what a genius her brother was. He was only 6 years old and remembered all the kingdoms, while she, at 20, couldn't remember a single thing. She then pointed to a kingdom, but the reaction she received from Oscar wasn't pleasing. He said it was the kingdom of Devlin. He then told his sister the story of Devlin and his devil. No one knew if the devil and Devlin had truly escaped or not. The relationship between Hermano and Devlin had never been good, and it was also said that they could attack Hermano. That's why the atmosphere became tense when they talked about Hermano. Listening to this, her face turned pale. Oscar said that Montego from Averlardo was cautious with Devlin, even though he played a good role. There had been heavy wars in the past, with defeated armies and burned cities. People said it was the devil himself who had single-handedly defeated the army. Hearing all this, she was surprised and expressed herself with a gesture of astonishment. But then Oscar told Mabel that there was no point in telling her all this because, at the end of the day, she was just a kid and wouldn't understand any of it. Hearing this, she got pissed off and made an aggressive sound as if she wanted to say that he was a kid too. He then laughed at her behavior and told her that he would read another book for her. He smiled at her and asked her to hold both hands out in front of her body as a gesture. Mabel thought to herself that it was all right for a 1-year-old not to know everything about a country's politics. She should instead enjoy spending time with her 6-year-old brother. Seeing that, the maids were so happy that the princess was playing with her highness. The scene changed. Finally, the summer was over, and Mabel was 8 months old. Xavier and Larima came to see her. Mabel could now show emotions, but they were worried about whether she could move or not. Despite being 8 months old, she still couldn't turn, which had become a matter of concern for them. She could crawl, but that was normal for a baby her age. Xavier assured her that her health tests were fine and there was nothing to worry about. Hearing this, she felt relieved. Mabel didn't expect them to be worried about her. She thought that maybe it was because she stayed in one place without much movement that they were concerned about her health. She wanted to show them that she could turn, however, she didn't know how to be a kid, or at least act like one. Larima gently put her hand on her face, and Mabel grabbed her finger, giving her a sense of reassurance that she was fine and didn't need to worry more. She knew that everyone might think she couldn't move, but at night she practiced turning by herself. However, she wanted to do it quietly, without anyone knowing. She didn't want Esteban to find out because if he did, he would know that all this time when she spat milk on his face, she did it intentionally, and that would definitely be troublesome for her. She suspected that he might punish her severely. She practiced quite hard to stand up, holding the wooden sticks of her bed. As she did it, she put a lot of effort into standing up. Esteban was coming to check on his daughter. Finally, after putting in so much effort, she managed to stand on her 2-foot-tall feet. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw that she had finally made it. But she knew she was capable of doing more, so she decided to run. She could feel her small steps on the bed. Lisandro was guarding her room from outside when he saw His Majesty walking towards the room. He told Lisandro that he wanted to see if his daughter was okay before going to sleep. He peeked from outside and was stunned to see his 8-month-old daughter, Mabel, trying to get a lamp. But seeing her father look at her like that, she was shocked. She couldn't think of any reason to explain how she suddenly started walking. She panicked, thinking about what her father and everyone in the palace would think after knowing that the child who had never even turned had suddenly started walking all by herself. She got scared about the consequences of tricking the Majesty. But nothing like that happened. Instead, His Majesty became very happy and proud, thinking his daughter was a genius. She exclaimed in happiness, expressing how proud he was of his daughter. Mabel couldn't understand what was going on and why her father was acting so strangely. His Majesty couldn't contain himself any longer and was overcome with joy. He took his daughter in his arms and started kissing her. He was so happy that he wanted to give her a gift to celebrate this day. Mabel tried to tell him that she didn't need anything and that all she wanted was for him to wake up and act normal. However, he decided to buy her a piece of land named Vistante, which was great for vacation. Mabel was surprised to hear that, thinking that land was not the same as beef soup. How could he give her that for just a meaningless thing? The next day, His Majesty was in a meeting with his men when one of them informed him that the Devil of Devlin had returned to the border, which now posed a threat. He might want to attack Ermano. He instructed his men to prepare a second team of swordmasters and send them to the border. This way, the Devil at Devlin would be distracted, and the search would be delayed. Everyone in the meeting thought that the king's behavior had suddenly changed, making the meeting feel tense and exhausting. They understood that the king was happy because of the princess, and that's why his behavior was very elegant. One of them asked him if he was okay because he seemed happy and was blushing. He was thinking about last night's incident. Had he not gone there quietly, he would never have witnessed such a beautiful and magnificent scene. He felt as lucky as a father. His daughter could walk now, and he proudly announced this to everyone. One of them asked him if she was only 8 months old. Listening to that, he proudly stated that his daughter was a genius. He also informed them that the day was soon approaching when she would call him Dad, and for that, he had decided to give her the land of Vistante. Everyone was shocked to hear his decision. They were thinking, how could the king decide to give such a significant piece of land to an 8-month-old? That land had been given to the king when he was a prince and held great political, trade, and geographic importance. One of them laughed awkwardly in utter tension and asked the king if he was joking. The king responded by saying that he was not kidding. Listening to that, his men started discussing among themselves, realizing that it was time for them to reevaluate their positions, considering the fact that the king had gifted his princess one of his lands. The king planned to celebrate his daughter's first birthday in a grand and big way. His men understood this, considering what he had recently given his daughter. They wondered how grand it would be. They were now more curious about the princess, especially because she hadn't made an appearance yet, so everyone was looking forward to meeting her. The king then ended the meeting to go see his daughter. Gustav was shocked to see him leave when there were many important documents to take care of. But the king began to walk towards his daughter without caring about anything else. Suddenly, someone called him from behind. He looked back and addressed the person as Lord Gardenia. Lord Gardenia requested that the king allow him to meet the princess. The king was a little shocked to hear that. Why was he so eager to meet the princess? He asked himself. He remembered that when the princess was born, she had cried for 3 months straight, claiming that he was very stubborn. However, Lord Gardenia informed him that now that the princess was 8 months old, it was appropriate to allow others to see her. The king didn't want him to meet her, so in an attempt to dismiss his request, he stated that the princess was too young, and he wasn't sure if she really wanted to meet anyone. Lord Gardenia pointed out in response that the king had just mentioned earlier that she could walk now. The king became upset, as he had confirmed it earlier and couldn't deny it now. Moreover, Lord Gardenia mentioned that in the future, the princess would be the heir of Gardenia, but the king couldn't confirm it as he didn't trust him or his intentions. He was worried because everyone wanted to take his daughter away. He didn't want Averlardo or Gardenia to have his daughter, as he didn't trust them. However, he didn't have any reason to deny Lord Gardenia's visit either. The most he could do was schedule an official visit. Lord Gardenia smiled at the king, understanding that he was not allowed to meet her at that moment, and he left the place. The king was irritated by Lord Gardenia's smile. He remembered that when he announced his marriage to Sienna, Gardenia had not been happy about it. From that point on, the king didn't feel comfortable around him. The scene shifted. Mabel understood that no secrets were actually kept secret in the palace. Everyone, including every single maid, knew that she could walk now. They found it cute that their princess could walk at only 8 months old. Xavier cautioned her to be careful from now on, as she could easily fall. She realized that it was the king who had informed everyone about her ability to walk. But she hoped that it was okay because now she could freely walk around without worrying about anyone seeing her. Larima and Xavier were discussing among themselves if it was too soon for her to walk. The nanny then asked them to stay with Mabel, as she would be back soon from work. Larima wanted to see Mabel walk more, so she asked if she could stand up again. Mabel nodded, indicating that she could do more. With Larima's support, she stood up. Both Larima and Xavier were excited to see her stand up and walk. Though Mabel felt tired, she continued for a little longer, seeing the happiness on their faces. After a while, Xavier and Larima gasped as they couldn't play with her anymore. Xavier then pointed out that Larima's clothes were not properly adjusted, which made the nanny angry. Mabel had never seen Lord Gardenia before, so she was a bit surprised. She felt sad and scared, recalling the earlier incident with Montego when he had attempted to kidnap her. She knew she had to be cautious around Lord Gardenia, as his face seemed suspicious to her. Out of fear, she grabbed Xavier. He reassured her that everything was okay, and they greeted Lord Gardenia. Mabel was shocked to hear the word Gardenia. Lord Gardenia then revealed the secret that he was Mabel's grandpa. Hearing this, she tried to utter the word grandpa, which sounded very cute to everyone. Everyone was amazed to see their little princess attempting to call her grandpa. She then realized that she had a grandpa as well. Lord Gardenia remarked that she had grown a lot, knowing how to walk and talk. He reacted to her in a way that felt very similar to her father's reaction, which surprised her. On the other hand, the king was very worried about his daughter meeting her grandpa. Gustav noticed him looking at the door and thought he couldn't focus on his work. He suspected that he might run away, even though the king had appointed him to take care of the consequences of his actions. But he was curious to know the reason that made the king worried. Was it because Lord Gardenia, who was the princess's grandpa, had come to meet her? And could he be the second candidate to steal his daughter after Montego? Well, it was obvious, as they both had their reasons. Montego wanted to steal her because he believed she was the seed of God, and on the other hand, Lord Gardenia could claim his rights over Mabel as her grandfather. The king couldn't let that happen. He couldn't allow them to come closer to her. He sought to protect her at any cost. Gustav knew that he had many tasks to take care of, which wouldn't be possible if the king wasn't focused on his work. So it would be better if he took a look at his daughter, found some relief, and then resumed his unfinished work. But the king denied that suggestion, stating that it would make him look foolish. Gustav was worried that the king was feeling uncomfortable but not expressing it. He assured him by saying that it was their first time meeting each other, so it could be uncomfortable for Mabel in the beginning. The king should go to Mabel because she might need him in front of someone unknown to her. Listening to that, the king's face lit up, as he finally had a reason to check on his daughter. Gustav also added that no matter what others thought, he was her papa, and she loved him the most. Though Gustav couldn't read Mabel's mind, it was all he had to provide comfort to the king. The king was very happy with him, thanking him for his great assistance. Gustav knew that the king might be overreacting, but it was necessary for him to go to his daughter. Otherwise, he would be lost in those thoughts for the entire day and unable to focus on his work. So they decided to go to her, but before that, the king asked Gustav about the work, to which he replied that he would handle it. The king thanked him and left the room. The scene shifted. Lord Gardenia took her on his lap and told her that his life had been full of adversity. He had a daughter named Sienna, whom he loved dearly. He hadn't wanted her to marry the king, but she had wanted to. So he had respected her decision, though he had wanted her daughter to be with him as long as possible. Mabel saw that when he met her, he couldn't hold back his tears. He cried heavily and took a long time to finally stop. He was so happy to see his granddaughter that he couldn't control his emotions. But the situation worsened when she stopped crying. He started blaming the king for being so cruel and terrible. He thought the king didn't possess a heart, or even blood. She knew her father was a bit weird, but that was a little too much to take. Now the story goes into a flashback where we see a woman. It was Siena Gardenia, the daughter of Lord Gardenia, a very beautiful woman. The king had proposed to her for marriage. Lord Gardenia called him the worst king in history. When the king was a prince, he didn't care about people's lives. The former king had brought him into battle, regardless of whether he would live or die. Everyone in the kingdom regarded him as the worst. When he got divorced, the king then proposed to Siena Gardenia. Lord Gardenia never liked the king, so he refused his proposal. However, he didn't know that his daughter liked the king. Mabel saw Lord Gardenia wringing his hands in anger. He also mentioned that he had tried to meet Mabel for 8 months, even though it would have taken only a week to meet her. It was the king who kept refusing him with different excuses. It was unreasonable and insulting to him. How could he not be allowed to meet the daughter of his beloved daughter, he asked. Although Mabel couldn't fully accept him as her grandfather, she let her guard down for the sake of humanity because of the injustice done to him. She called him Grandpa once again, and Lord Gardenia became emotional hearing that. He understood that Mabel was trying to comfort him and told her that she had a beautiful mind, just like her mother. Well, she knew that. To her, her mother was the best person in the empire, and her father was terrible. Because Lord Gardenia was so angry at the king, she didn't know how to react to that. Suddenly, the door opened. The nanny greeted the king. He then asked Mabel if she was scared of a stranger. Lord Gardenia held her a little tightly, as if he didn't want to give her to him. He then greeted the king. The king asked him to stand up. Mabel could feel the inner conflict between the in-laws, which she didn't like. She didn't want to be a part of their conflict. They both started pulling each other closer, but Mabel did not want to get involved in their trouble. She wondered how she would escape from there. The nanny ran over, seeing the tension between the father-in-law and son-in-law over Mabel. Mabel waved at the nanny, signaling her to get out of that situation. However, neither of them would let her go. Finding no other option, Mabel grabbed the wooden stick from the bed and moved very fast from there. All the people present were shocked to see what they had just witnessed. How could a girl that small move so fast? It seemed impossible for a child her age to do such a thing. They couldn't believe their eyes. Lord Gardenia was very proud of his granddaughter and started bragging about her. But the king, not to be outdone, took all the credit, stating that it was not unusual at all since she was his daughter. According to him, her motor nerves were very sensitive, just like her father's. The king then recalled that Lord Gardenia's family had always possessed a talent for excellent swordsmanship for generations. In response, Lord Gardenia mentioned that Mabel would obviously excel in both writing and martial arts in the future, as she was the heir of Gardenia. The king retorted by saying that she would excel in every field because she was his daughter. Mabel had had enough of their stupid competition and couldn't take any more of it. She wondered why they were arguing in the first place. There was no point in proving anything. She decided to go to the nanny to get away from this nonsense. But as she turned back, she saw her grandfather standing with his arms extended towards her. Her father then called her to come to him. The pressure became too much for Mabel. Who should she choose? She felt nervous and couldn't think of anything else. She had a feeling that if she chose one over the other, something bad might happen. On the verge of tears, her brother entered the room like a savior for her. She knew that she didn't have to cry, as it was the best way for her to ignore the possible danger. She walked towards her brother and hugged him. Both the in-laws were disappointed that they had not won the competition by proving themselves the best. Oscar apologized to her for not coming to her quickly due to the huge amount of homework he had. Oscar asked her if she had been looking for him all this time. Mabel was so happy to see Oscar because no one could complain about a 6-year-old. In her mind, she told both of them to stop competing with each other. She was stuck in the middle, and it became difficult for her. The scene shifted. Montego was presented before the king of Averlardo for having committed the kidnapping of the Royal Highness of Hermano, meaning Mabel. The king had blonde hair and red eyes and was sitting on his throne. He said that although Montego had returned to Averlardo in one piece, he should be severely punished for his crime. From then on, he would be banned forever from going to Hermano. Montego told himself that it was really hard. Unexpectedly, though, there was a condition that arose again. He was fortunate enough that the king of Hermano spared his life and let him go. The king then asked Montego about the seed of God, meaning Mabel. He answered that he had failed in his conquest, so the holy god would never forgive him. But the king was not impressed by the answer. He said that he already knew all that, and wanted to know if there was anything more to know. The king then told Montego that he had never expected him to bring Mabel in the first place, because he knew he could never do that, and that he was inherently incompetent. He then asked Montego once again if there was anything left to say to him. Montego knew that since he had failed to bring back Mabel, the seed of God, he had to endure that humiliation. But he had never expected to be humiliated from the first day. The king then questioned him again to see if he actually understood what he was saying or wanted to know. He then told Montego that he had let him go to Hermano to check if they were protecting the seed of God well or not. They wanted to bring people to Averlardo, and that was just a pre-workout. Montego then told the king that he had been a decoy, which was unfortunate, but he wasn't familiar with the person. He then asked the king if he had any plans for the future, to which he replied that he indeed had a plan. Now we know the name of the king. It was Michael Averlardo, also known as the God King. It was said that a person with the surname Averlardo could only be obtained by the God King. Everything was handled by the agent, and he never showed up. The rumor about the existence of the God King was just a rumor, without knowing his appearance or age. No one knew his actual age. It was thought that everyone presumed the God King to be basically a statue of an old man with silver hair, but a beautiful, pretty face. Everyone who saw him would call him an angel from heaven. But in reality, inside the person, there was an extremely evil soul who knew its actual age. Though Montego himself was curious about his age, he never dared to know anything about this evil. The scene changed. We saw that the nurse was concerned about Mabel because something had happened to her. The nanny asked her if there was something wrong or if she was feeling uncomfortable for some reason. The princess had been having a toothache. She had opened her mouth in pain. The nurses then started smiling at each other. Seeing that, Mabel was shocked. She had so much pain inside her mouth, and those whom she had truly trusted above all, more than her father and brother, were laughing at her condition. Xavier entered the room, asking the nurses about what was going on and what had happened to the princess. They had been delighted to inform him that she had been having a toothache, which meant that she had been teething. Listening to that, she smiled in pain. She had looked at the nurse in surprise, unable to believe that she was growing teeth. She had been so excited, thinking that once she grew teeth, she would be able to speak in no time. Larima had told the nanny that she didn't know why Mabel had been so happy, but she had looked cute. The nanny had then told Larima to make arrangements, as the news must have reached the emperor and he might have been coming soon. Though Mabel had been happy, her mouth still hurt. To console her, the nanny said that it was okay. It would hurt a little, but that was proof that she was teething. With tears in her eyes, she made an expression as if she knew it would hurt, but she had never expected it to hurt this much. The nanny had complimented her for taking so much pain, even though she was just a kid. Mabel knew that she would get used to this pain, just like she was used to getting compliments for small things. All of them had started saying that the princess hadn't cried, so seeing her cry had been something special to them, and she had looked very cute like that. She had gotten angry listening to that, asking how they could laugh like that. She had been crying out in pain, and they had been calling it cute. She had decided that she would never cry like that again. The king had come running to see his daughter teething. He had been excited and overjoyed with the news and couldn't hold himself back. Mabel hadn't known how he had known about it so quickly, but then she remembered that it had been Lisandro. He had always watched over her, and he must have been the one who had informed him about the news. The king had started to think about what he should give his daughter this time. What do you think could be the present the king would give to his beloved daughter? Can the problems be resolved between the in-laws? Who is God King, and what are his intentions about Mabel? For this, you have to wait for the next part. Wait.